welcome to the College Nook podcast. I'm Natalie Keller. Today's episode concludes my first year running this podcast. I was able to record, edit, and release 13 amazing conversations. It was a true pleasure to speak with every guest I had on my podcast, and I want to thank them for taking the time to be part of my mini project. Enough about that. Let me introduce the guest of today's episode. In this episode of the podcast, I'm speaking with a good friend of mine, Samantha Borrego. Samantha is a passionate higher education professional. She had a very rich and versatile undergraduate journey, which was full of support of her mentors, professors, and advisors. As a first-generation college student, she's very appreciative of all of the guidance she has gotten, and she's paying it forward as a first-gen program coordinator. Listen to Sam's story and learn about her transformative experiences that she had in college. If you enjoy these conversations, please subscribe to the College Nook podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube, and follow us on social media at college.nook. And now I bring you Sam Borrego. You're officially my second, colleague that is joining me on this podcast. So that's really exciting. I had Michelle earlier this year. Mm-hmm. And before we go into this conversation, I wanted to ask if you could introduce yourself, your little academic and career pathway, where you started and where you're now, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, for sure. So currently, I work as the coordinator for first generation initiatives at Metropolitan State University of Denver. And our campus serves, about 56% of our student body are considered first generation, meaning neither a parent or a guardian has earned a bachelor's degree. So my role is basically to plan events, workshops, different things like that to serve the needs of that specific population. And we do a whole range of things and have a leadership program, talk about imposter syndrome, a little bit of stuff that we'll talk about today. Yeah. But it's pretty fun. So before that, which is actually how I met you, I was an advisor for MSU. Yes. And that was an awesome role. And it was, I guess, what led me into this next position in some ways. But I guess I'll start with my early college career. So I'm a proud alum of CSU in Fort Collins, and I went there for both my undergraduate degree, my bachelor's, and my graduate degree, my master's. So my bachelor's is in communication studies and political science, and then my master's is in student affairs and higher education. So I chose to go to CSU because it was 5 minutes from my house. I grew up in Fort Collins. And
that made sense.
Yes, I did. I knew I wanted to have the, traditional college experience, but I really had a hard time leaving my family. And so I went to CSU 5 minutes down the road. I did end up living in the residence halls and stuff, which wasn't a part of my initial plan, but it was from the recommendations of people there who were also first gen to do that because it would be the best experience. And I loved it. So I guess fast forward, when I was in my master's program, I worked with first gen low income students of color and helped them apply to college. So it was an access program, which is actually where I met my husband. And we worked with students in the Fort Collins community to just help them access higher ed. And that really gave me a lot of my passion for what I do now in serving marginalized populations. I think I had it actually before that because of my own experiences, but that was kind of my journey. And then stayed at CSU, worked at the cultural center that's called El Centro, which serves the Latinx students. And then that's when I went to MSU and met you. Yeah. So that's my journey.
Yeah. That's a cool journey. Yeah. One thing that I noticed, you mentioned your undergrad was in communication studies and political science. And that's always interesting to me because all the people in higher education that we meet, advisors, residence life people, activities, we all come from different pathways.
Right.
And when we just start college, we never have this idea of, oh, I want to be an advisor or I want to be a residence hall coordinator. So I wanted to ask you, your just decision to go to college, like, can you share a little bit about that? Was it something that you have planned?
Yeah.
Or like, how did it go?
Oh, I love you asking me this because I really like to tell this story.
Cool.
So, yeah. So I think it's important for you to know more about my background. And so I grew up in a low income family. And so my mama was a single parent for, a few years before she married my stepdad. And so the experiences that I had while she was a single mom, I think really had a big impact on me. And then even while she was, or she's still married to my stepdad, but we've just always struggled financially. And so my mama from a young age would talk to me about, like, I don't want you to make the same mistakes that I have. I want you to have a better life and better opportunities. And she had actually started college, but then had to drop out to have my brother. And I think tried to like come back and stuff like that, but just never was able to finish a bachelor's degree. And so I knew that about my mom. And then from like the environment that I grew up in and just not having a lot of resources and the things that I saw my peers have, because the schools that I went to, there was a lot more people from middle class backgrounds who had these really nice homes and really nice cars and went on these trips and like did all this stuff and had a lot more freedom than what I noticed my family having. And so it was really like that realization of the comparison between like, this is what my life looks like and this is what their life looks like, that highly motivated me to be successful and to go to college. And so I just made it my mission to do everything possible from my whole education.
Yeah.
Everything to be excellent. Go ahead, ask me what you're going to say.
That is an awesome piece of your story that I think I didn't know before. Like this little aspect of you were surrounded by upper middle class families who can go and travel and do these things. That's very interesting because in the US, what I'm observing, and we talk about this in higher ed all the time, is that there are these pockets of different populations of people kind of distributed by their income, right? We have better school districts, not so good school districts. And that makes me think, like, I wonder, because I don't know, I wonder how students feel if you're surrounded by everyone who's going to college, whose parents went to college, and it's like a natural next step for you versus you go to the school where kids drop out without even finishing. Like, how does that impact your persistence and your kind of desire to continue? I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
Because it just sounds like that was a big factor in you deciding to move forward.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, maybe a part that I should also mention is that, like, when my mom was a single parent, we lived on the poorer side of Fort Collins. So Fort Collins is not like it's a pretty middle class like area, but there's still certain areas that are the low income areas. And so we lived on the side of town that was the low income area, and I went to the schools that, like what you're talking about, were the not that great schools. And all of my peers had the same lifestyle that I did, and most of them were people of color. And then when my mom got married and she, her and my stepdad wanted to try to like help us improve, we were still the low income people, but we lived in the area that was nicer in Fort Collins and went to the nicer schools. And so then I had this stark comparison of like, this is what my life was like here with all these people of color who also have parents who are separated, also have parents who didn't go to college and, barely graduated high school or didn't. My dad did not graduate high school. And then I have all these people who have very educated parents. And so it was just like black and white to me of like, okay, well, if I choose this life, this is what's going to happen to me. And if I choose this life, this is what's going to happen to me, at least in my mind. And
Yeah.
and it was a big motivation. Like I would find myself like wanting things that they had, and not in like an envious way, but just like a goal way. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's such an interesting piece of where you're at right now, to be honest with you, Sam. And I wanted to ask, in your high school experience, what do you think those factors were that were like, hey, college is my next step? I'm just curious. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. So I actually was discussing this recently with my brother, my big brother, about like my motivation and where it stems from. And like I told you, for me, it was like whoa, this is my life and this is their life. And like, how can I get this life that they have? And how can I like set myself up for that? And so I was president of student council, president of this, president of that, like everything at my school that you could be the president of, that was me. And so I really pushed myself to be excellent in every way. And I had that like internal drive, which is one thing. And then on top of that, I had such good teachers in my high school. And I might cry, but like thinking about them and how much I am gonna cry, sorry. But like they really pushed me to do stuff that I never thought I could do. And I think that's actually a really good part of my whole experience. But
Yeah.
I've always had really good mentors that have just been like, you have something about you, and have helped set me up for success. So, and it started in middle school and high school, like my teacher Laura, my teacher Cree. I really appreciate them because of, I think, just like what they invested in me and how they taught me to be an even better leader. And I don't know, when they were there throughout, like they would be people that I would still go and babysit for while I was in college and talk to. And, my teacher Cree, she's the one who helped me apply to college, and she's the one who helped me apply to the first gen scholarship that I got at CSU. And she created this like leadership program not for me, but kind of. And she did all this stuff to like help me grow as a person and as an individual. And they were just great mentors. And Laura too, like she was my like science teacher and my like dance teacher, and just someone I really admired. And both of them were just like really successful, confident women who went to college. And Laura, she was a cheerleader at CSU. I remember her telling me that story. And so, yeah, I had really good mentors. And there was a lot of teachers at my school that were awesome and who helped me in different ways. But I feel like those two like really stood out to me as like impacting me and my goals and helping me get to where I am.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I feel like you just answered my very last question of each episode. And I'm going to just say it because maybe there's going to be a different answer. But what is the most impactful thing that happened to you during your educational career? And I feel like this is a big one. That's probably out there somewhere.
Yeah.
But I want to talk a little bit about your college experience next.
Okay.
Now that you are a student in college, you have certain academic goals. We all tell students you have to pick a major, this and that. Share a little bit about your exploration in college.
Okay. So I knew I wanted to go to college and that was really important to me, but I honestly had no idea what I wanted to do. My parents they didn't go to college. And so they had ideas. Like my dad really wanted me to be a nurse. And I don't think my mom minded like what I did, but I think that we had limited ideas of like what was out there. Like I knew you could be a teacher, I knew you could be something in the medical field, and I knew you could be like a lawyer. And that's pretty much all I knew that you could do with college,
Yep.
because those are the things I was exposed to. And I think that's so common for first-gen students to just have really narrow views of the possibilities. And so someone recommended to me to go on undeclared because I was like, I kind of want to be a teacher, but then I also want to be a lawyer and a politician and stuff like that. And so they're like, well, just be undeclared so that you can kind of explore more. And so I did do that, but I was so embarrassed at the fact that I was undeclared because, you know, like the first thing they ask you is like, what's your name? What's your year? And what are you studying? Yeah, what's your major? And so every time I'd be like, oh, my major's Spanish this week. And then next time I'd be like, oh, my major is political science. And oh, my major's this. Like I would just make up majors that I thought sounded interesting because I never wanted to tell people that I was undeclared because I didn't want them to think that I like didn't have goals and stuff like that. Because that's how it appeared to me, even though I learned later that that's not like really how it is. And I shouldn't feel like that, but I did. So I stayed undeclared for the first kind of year of college, but I took a really awesome class, which was communication and pop culture. And that was my favorite class my first year of college. Like I loved it because we analyzed just different forms of communication. We analyzed media, we analyzed like TV and movies and all this stuff. And we just talked about like the meaning behind all the different messages that we have in society. And it was just so fun. And I felt like it was so natural. And then one of my professors, who was also my advisor, he was like, well, why don't you major in that? And I was like, what do you mean? And
You could major in that?
yeah, exactly. I was like, I've never heard of that major. And so then I was like, oh, maybe I should. And he like showed me the classes that they had, and they were like rhetoric and Western thought. They were, what was it, film and media criticism, and like all these like just fun things. Oh, and gender communication, conflict in communication.
Nice.
What was the other one? So there's just tons of classes where like, oh my gosh, like this major is me. Like I love communication. I love analyzing junk, and I love like it was it. So I ended up declaring my major at the end of my first year of college, and that person served as my advisor for pretty much the whole time I was in school. Did that answer your question? Because I kind of forgot it.
Yeah, you did.
All excited.
You know, you obviously picked something that you were interested in because you took a class that allowed you to explore that new area. And that's something I think a lot of students are afraid to do because they want to pursue something that is visible,
Right.
like you mentioned, because when you are 18, there's only so many things you see in your life, which is teacher, you see teachers, you see doctors, you have an idea of there is a lawyer that makes a lot of money, and there is a bunch of health professions out there. But beyond that, there's a lot of these professions and jobs and whatever you want to, careers that we just don't see. And that kind of brings me to another point of like, how did you discover that higher education can be a career?
Yeah.
You know, because a lot of times we find something that we're passionate about and we never think about making it our career. But then how did it happen?
Okay, cool. I'm glad you asked me because I started talking about that a minute ago, and then I was like, wait, you shouldn't ask me that. So let me stop. But I feel like I was destined to work in higher ed because literally every one of my experiences in undergrad like led me to that path. So first off, my first job on campus, and I consider it like my first professional job because before that I would only do like babysitting or worked at a fast food place, stuff like that. But I worked in the graduate programs office with two really important ladies in my life, Kathy Lucas and Nita Amadon. And they hired me as a work study, and I would just like help them with stuff in the office, like organizing, you know, like a typical office student staff role.
Assistant. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But in that, I learned, well, I first off didn't know what a graduate program was or had ever heard that term. And so I learned what that was. And I learned that they had all these different programs, and it was in the School of Education. And so in the School of Education, they had like counseling programs, they had like a teacher licensing, principal junk, and then they also had the student affairs and higher ed program. And like right away, and this is why I think mentors are so important, because again, these two ladies were like, you would be really good at this program. And like I said, I'd never thought of it, never heard of it, and I didn't even know what a master's program was. And they're like, you would be really good. Like you have that like personality that would just make you good at this program and this career. And they were the first two people to tell me that. And I was just like, huh, okay, like I don't know. And then once interviews came around and I started meeting the students in the program, I was like, oh, these are people that I really like, and I could see myself being like, because I would help them with, like some of the processes. And then through my first-gen scholarship, I met this phenomenal man who also was a really powerful mentor for me. His name is Paul Fair, and he's a very influential person at CSU. They even have like a building named after him, but he helped get, I know, he's so cool. But he helped get some of the first TRIO grants at CSU. And so he is very like first gen access oriented person. And so I met him because of my scholarship and because I was in something called the Key Communities, which was like a learning program. And I think it was him that told me about this thing called the Naspa Undergraduate Fellowship Program, which it's NUF, and it's for people who are in their undergraduate degree interested in going into higher ed, and they're from marginalized backgrounds. And so he told me, he was like, oh, you should apply to that. Because I told him I was kind of interested because of what Kathy and Nita had told me. And he was like, you should apply to it. And he was like, but you have to have a mentor. And then he offered me my mentor and helped me do the whole application system. And so that also was a really transformative point. And he really instilled like a lot of passion and guided me throughout my undergrad experience all the way to graduate school. And even now, like I think of moments and I'm like, I have to be like Paul. Like, what would Paul do in this situation? But yeah, it was him and it was them who taught me what it was. And then a lot of other people really emphasized it too, that I worked with. Like one of my other mentors, Amber, she encouraged me to do it, helped me with things. So like I said, I feel like I was destined to be in higher ed, and I had all these people pushing me and telling me that I would be good at it. And that's why I think it's good to make connections, and that's why it's important to have mentors, because otherwise I would have never known. And to get jobs on campus, because again, I would have never known, because I would not have been exposed to it at all.
Totally. And that's interesting. And now that I work in computer science department, and the majority of my students then go and look for jobs in industry, and that's a lot of like the business organizations, and there's a lot of that approach of like networking and connections, and you have to have an internship, so you have a connection, and then you have a referral. So I've been exposed to that more and more in my time in computer science because of the kind of nature of the industry. But like you mentioned, higher education seems the same way, to where you meet some people, make connections, then they point out certain things that you could be good at, and kind of it goes.
Right.
One thing that I wanted to kind of mention is, based on your story, it just feels like things happened, right? Which sometimes it's luck, sometimes it's like you have to be in the right place in the right time. But I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about being intentional. Like, what can we do? What can students do to seek those opportunities, right?
That's a great question. And actually, I'm glad you asked. So you're so good at asking questions, Natalie. And also, I remember we said that it was going to be conversational, and I haven't asked you any questions, so I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
Okay. But I decided I was going to get my master's in higher ed my second year of college. And I think that's way earlier than most people decide. But again, like I had Paul, I had Nita, and I had Kathy. And then what I also had was leadership experiences. And again, all those people telling me to do the same thing. And so I was very intentional the rest of my college experience because I knew what my end goal was. And so every single experience I had after that was all to come to this bigger
End
goal.
goal.
Exactly. So I applied to be an orientation leader at my campus, and I didn't think I would get that role, but I did. And that was an incredible position. I got the orientation position. And then I also, my second year, applied to be in this. It was a second year program with the key communities, and it was focused on leadership. So I applied to be in that. And I met my future boss in orientation, Zach Mercurio, who ended up being
Oh, I
another.
know Zach.
Yeah, and he ended up being another mentor for me and very
Oh my
influential in my
goodness.
life. Yeah. And then because of that, I ended up applying to be a key mentor. And my first year, I did key service, and I met, who did I meet that year? I don't even know, but I met someone who, again, like influenced my life, and I applied to be a returner key mentor. And so then the next year I worked with undeclared students, and this is my final year of college. And that's where I met Amber, and she is another big mentor of mine. Amber Paulson Hofseth, I think is how you say her last name. And she really helped me out. But anyway, I did that. And then in between those things, those were like my main jobs on campus because I got paid to do all those things. Well, except for being in the leadership class. And then on top of that, I applied to do an exchange program where I went to the University of, it was Katwadi, University Autónoma de Yucatan, and went there for a week. And then I had this idea of I should do an internship here because I could learn a different experience at another university in another country. And so then that's how I ended up studying abroad and having an internship abroad. Is I just asked the people if I could do that, and they not only paid for me to go and for my housing, but they also paid for me to do a class at their institution. So I both got to do my internship and I got to work there, which was super cool. And so I had that experience. And then I did this thing called Campus Step Up, where we talk about, marginalized identities and identity in general, but it's like a very transformative, like it's a heavy type of week. And I did that 2 years in a row. So like I said, literally everything that I did from pretty much my sophomore year on was all to help me get into higher ed and to look good for grad school and that kind of thing. And I was very intentional about that.
Nice. And I think that is the important part of this conversation, because it's not only the connections, but then it's also a meaningful and intentional steps that you take, a person takes to reach their goal with guidance of their mentors and all of that. I didn't know you studied abroad. A lot of the students that I talk to kind of shy away from that idea because of the cost.
Yeah.
But like you mentioned, you can find ways to sponsor your trip, pay for tuition. And I know there are a ton of study abroad scholarships out there. You just have to ask, I suppose.
Right. Yeah. I did end up getting a scholarship, and I learned you can use some of your financial aid too. If you take, like, I don't know, however many credits is the rule and stuff like that. But yeah, I didn't think I'd ever be able to study abroad, but ended up making it happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I didn't realize you and Zach knew each other, like literally, because I know he came to talk at our professional development conference as a keynote speaker. And ever since then, I've been following him and his work, and how he has now a course with Simon's big platform online. Do you know Simon Sinek?
No.
So Simon, he's a big guy out there, big influencer,
Mm-hmm.
and he talks a lot about leadership,
Mm-hmm.
healthy leadership style, what
Mm-hmm.
leaders should be and should not be doing. And
Mm-hmm.
he now created this platform where he invites other experts on the topic to create their courses. And Zach has a course on his platform. It's really awesome.
Oh, that's cool. I actually didn't know that.
Yeah,
That's
it's
really
cool.
neat. Yeah, Zach definitely influenced my leadership in a lot of ways. And yeah,
Maybe we should
thank
take
you.
his class to get some boost again.
I know. He's so inspiring. I love, like, he just makes me
Mhm.
feel motivated.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm. That's cool.
So I think the last portion of our conversation, I really wanted to structure around some maybe big takeaways and lessons learned. As you're working with first gen students, what is it that you are telling them? What kind of I guess, steps you're encouraging them to take while they're in college? Because one of the biggest mistakes I think students make
Hmm.
is they just go and take classes
Hmm.
and then they go home and work. And I want to be very cognizant of the fact that a lot of our students, they have other things going on, right?
Hmm.
They have families, they have
Hmm.
family commitments, they have work, sometimes even
Hmm.
full time. So what do you think would be the right balance, and how do you still try to do some of those things to help you explore what is it that you want to do? Because honestly, one thing without another wouldn't happen if you haven't tried to get an on-campus job and then meet these people and so on and so forth.
Hmm.
So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
So, when I was an advisor, I feel like I would often encourage my students to be intentional in the courses that they pick. So, especially when their major required a minor, and like what would help be an asset to you and your career and your goals. And I would help them pick classes that would achieve this goal. What makes sense? Like if you're majoring in sociology and you really want to work with at-risk youth, can you take classes that are around psychology of, young people or whatever?
Adolescence, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
adolescence, that's the word. Or, there was one that we had that was like juvenile delinquency or something like
Hmm.
that. So can you
Criminal justice, yeah.
criminal justice? Yeah. So how can you shape all of the things that you're choosing to be strategic about what you want to do? And
Yeah.
I think I do less of that now that I'm in this role because I don't have as much, I don't really talk with students as much about the literal classes that they're taking, but it's more like an encouragement to get involved in different ways and to start practicing what you've learned in leadership and things like that. And so what I typically recommend to students, because at MSU we have somewhat of a unique population where a lot of our students work more than I would say the average college student. And so work
Hmm.
like 2-3 jobs or full-time, something significant like that. And so I think it's a little bit harder for them to get involved on campus. Whereas maybe for me, because I didn't have to work that much, I was able to get involved in some other things and because I had a scholarship and stuff. But I think it's still important for them to try to sacrifice some time and to make time. And so sometimes I find myself having a conversation with students of like, if it means taking out a little bit more of a loan so that you have a little bit more time, like you're not having to work as much to be able to do this service project or this leadership class or opportunity or this internship, it's worth it. And because I think for first gen students, especially in our heads, I just need the degree and that's going to get me the job. I always thought like degree equals job and equals
Mm.
money and success. But it really doesn't, that's not the equation. The equation is degree plus internships plus blah, 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 all this stuff that
Yeah.
people expect you to have when you graduate. And even me, like I had a lot of stuff on my resume and it was still hard to find my first job, and that's the case. And so then imagine if you're the student who has nothing to show that you have taken in what you learned and have applied it, it's going to be even harder. And so I really try to push our first gen students to make that sacrifice and to just make the time, because it's going to be
Yeah.
so important for them in the future. And it's hard. I'm not going to lie, for them. It is hard, but I don't want them to be stuck or in that situation. So I do really try to push them to do that.
Given that you have a very rich experience with so many meaningful individuals on your pathway, could you identify that one or two things that were most impactful if you think about?
Hmm. Okay, I would say most impactful. It's really hard because I did have really incredible experiences, but maybe so in addition, I always recommend for people to get a mentor, to find a mentor, have someone who believes in you and can encourage you even when you can't encourage yourself or believe in yourself, because they just help build you up. And then secondly, I think the other most impactful position for me was being a key mentor,
Mm-hmm.
because I got to work with other first gen low income students of color. And so I saw myself in my students, and it just helped me grow as an individual, as a leader, and as a professional, because it was one of the first times where I didn't feel as alone and feel like my challenges were unique. I realized,
Mm-hmm.
oh, this is actually what other people experience too. And it then made me more passionate to go and to do my ultimate mission of being in student affairs and serving people from marginalized backgrounds like myself. And so
Yeah.
that was very transformative and
Mm-hmm.
influenced pretty much every other part of my journey.
Yeah. And honestly, the work that you currently do, you
Mhm.
have so many workshops that talk about the hidden curriculum
Mhm.
in college and things that students don't always get from their families, like even building credit or
Mhm.
paying off debt
Yes.
and like navigating all of that. I think
Mhm.
we don't talk about it as
Mhm.
much, money
Totally.
topics and financial planning. And
Mhm.
so some of those topics really inspire even the podcast episodes that I'm having, and I will
Mhm.
have. January will be around financial literacy and planning, so I'm really excited
Cool.
about that.
That's
Uh,
awesome.
yeah, but it's kind of a mixture of so many different aspects of things, and that bring us to where we are right now. And I think mentorship is one of those things that almost deserves its own conversation,
Does, yeah.
because it's big. And
Mhm.
as a professional in higher education, I will say that I feel like I don't have active mentors in my life that
Mhm.
really we kind of meet with on a regular basis, or I feel comfortable reaching out to. I do have excellent people that I know they're there for me, but
Mhm.
I don't know if that's like formal mentorship. Like,
Yeah.
do you feel like you have formal mentors that like, okay, this and this person, they're my mentors, and we
Mhm.
both know about that?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think I still do, because I just need them in some ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I like wisdom. I love the wisdom that they have and how they can just speak with this different lens, and in the moments where I feel stuck, then I
Hmm.
have them to go to. And
Totally.
I would say I'm not as good at keeping up or like regularly talking to my mentors as I used to
Hmm.
be, because in undergrad it was just like, and in grad school, so many little fires that I needed help putting out, or little crises that I had. And I needed to work on my confidence a lot through
Hmm.
that whole time. And so like I said, I needed them to help build me up. And now that I'm a professional, I noticed that early in my first few professional years, I would still call them a lot and talk to them a lot. And then now I think I do less, but still in those moments where I'm like, I really don't know what to do, I'll call them. So I think it would be better if I set up more frequent time.
Regular. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I have new ones too. Like Paul is such a legend in my mind, and like he'll always impact my experience, and Zach, like, but I don't keep in touch with them as regularly as I used to. And now I have other people who I reach out to more frequently when I'm in those moments. And so
Got it.
I think sometimes your mentors like change based on the circumstances.
Absolutely. That makes
Mhm.
total sense.
Mhm.
Well, I really appreciate your time and wisdom and sharing your story, really. And
Mhm.
I hope that we'll be able to meet sometime again and
Mhm.
talk about other important topics when it comes to student success and just figuring out this whole college and career experience.
Mhm.
But this has been really good. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.